Hi everyone. This is an unusual sort of video I'm doing, but it could be the way of the future for a while now. I'm experimenting with doing sort of these kinds of off-the-cuff videos with just one image, maybe, or so. But yeah, it's a new format, and I wanted to update things in a more casual manner because usually my uploads are scripted and whatnot, but I've kind of gotten tired of the old video essay format for the moment. I think it's just kind of fatigue of making them, of editing them, but also I think I've just run out of most of the really meaty topics that I wanted to cover. But the way, I'm approaching this is I'm just getting my thoughts out there now with some notes. There will be notes, and it won't, be too infrequent, maybe. It'll be basically if I'm hit by a thought that, and it's not going to be like half-baked, hopefully. It's just more like stuff that I've been thinking about for a while that's not going to be a full video essay with all the bells and whistles. It's something you can just put on and listen to, which, I enjoy that kind of content. I know a lot of you do. And it's stuff you won't really need visual aid for. I just sometimes think that can be distracting and redundant. I am going to make another video essay someday. I don't know what it is, but it'll probably happen. Something, more edited. But there are other places that are garnering my attention. So I basically am deactivating my Patreon, because I finished the big comic that I had done for the past year and a half. So thoughts I have on the topics, which, don't require the whole video format. It's going to be something like a kind of movie that I enjoy, a kind of music, or some aspect of it that I haven't seen addressed in other videos from other people, and that I haven't addressed in a particular way. And and I'm also moving away from focusing on YouTube. There's a group of writers that I'm a part of that I've been producing a lot of stuff for, and so there's going to be attention put there, but there may be more uploads from me just because of this format that I'm playing around with. So we'll see. But the topic in this video that I wanted to make, and I didn't really want to make another separate video for it, but it was just something that I have been thinking about for a very long time and debating with myself and being kind of in conflict in a way, but it's something I call the tyranny of CGI. And it's gone through kind of a, being anti-CGI has kind of become a little, I don't know, eye roll worthy in some ways, but I feel like that's more when it's in a knee-jerk fashion. And yet, why is there a knee-jerk reaction to it? And so I thought about it for a while, and, I think I've just been too kind to CG in the past. It's like, well, if it's used right, it's fine, but how much I've seen it take over the imagery of movies, it just, I feel less and less generous towards it, and any generosity I've given feels kind of hollow now. I feel animosity towards its look, like, what it's done to movies. Of course, that goes beyond movies. It comes down to, like, a progressively, I don't know, like, technocratic mindset that art is improved by advancements in tools, and we must soon be freed from those tools. Kind of like what we've been seeing with AI. But the perfection for me in handmade, or the, not so much perfection, but sort of refining a handmade craft is has been thrown away for sort of clawing towards an aesthetic approach that I can only describe it as Gnostic. Gnostic in the sense of, the physical is bad and the spiritual is what we need to get to. We need to shed the physical, and it's just kind of weird how much seems to subscribe to that. But we can, there are technologies like 3D printing, digital compositing, and stuff that actually serve and they better practical and miniature effects. Or they take out certain parts that are sort of, harder, repetitive, but not the parts that make that make them what they are. And that's the key. It's they serve. And it's way too much of what computers have done in film is to become the master to whom armies of mistreated and underpaid animators are basically slaves. The tool, the tool should serve the final product. It's not be the final product. And I'd suggest there are very few scenarios where CGI as CGI has been well utilized. Tron stands out as one of those exceptions because of how unearthly sections of CGI were in that film. Emulation of reality wasn't the aim. No matter what I've seen so many boneheaded reviews of that film. The worst was Red Letter Media's review of it, where Rich Evans and the bald future man, Packard or something, Jack, they had some really bad takes on it, but it was usually because they were misperceiving the point, I think, of the visuals. But the method is to employ where it doesn't feel out of place or become all-consuming spectacle, and that's rare. But that limits what CGI should be. But I think that's all for the best. It's better to find creative solutions to bringing certain images to the screen through physical materials. And this in turn should be serviced by the computer and calculation, preconception, and whatnot, so that the final product is better, or as good as it, can be. Integrating, new technology to serve filming of real materials should be the end goal, but people get stuck along that path, and that which, it's supposed to serve, becomes enticing in how it's sort of amorphous potential of it. That's the fallacious and kind of soul-robbing detour of CG. Computer-generated images, it does rob us of our imaginations in a weird way. And if you've seen my video on realism in fantastic cinema, I kind of basically was talking about this. But there's no gestalt between what is being presented by that medium and the minds of the audience, and that medium being CGI. So in literature, you've got engagement of the mind, that's almost total. And in radio, that comes out pretty nicely, wonderfully, in fact. And then comics, you've got the gutters between panels, and that's where the mind fills in. And in film and the non-digital realizations of fantastic and extraordinary stuff, it's the limitations and the cutting around the effects that conjure sort of an impression in our mind that's unique to each of us, actually. And it completes or compensates for what isn't seen or for any shortcomings. Usually that's why. The latter is true with the proviso, that you're of a participatory mind. You want to participate. You're not going to automatically just be looking to dissect it, take it apart, or not play along. And I think CGI limits that true participation. Because despite it's like this never-ending deluge about how immersive it is, because it fills in all the gaps in perception. And in those shots where typically the film would cut away from the effect, our imagination continues it and links it up to wherever it, might continue again. But CGI tyrannically, and that's why I've used this word, it just tyrannically envisions in the most granular way how something fantastic takes place. And in doing so, it dulls the audience's imagination because they no longer have any missing pieces to construct in their heads. And everything unfolds on screen. This is the great mistake of CGI. The thinking that providing so much will make classic images, when really it's just numbing, meandering kind of dross. And then you have endless piling on of layers, into just a visual slop. It's brightly colored, but it's smeared across the screen though. The escalation, of technique for practical and model effects, I think reached sort of a glossy zenith in the 80s and 90s. Those shots become infinitely more readable compared to sequences from, take your pick, from some of the more unrestrained Marvel films. But, those are cloying spectacles. But the thing is, why does it matter that something is rendered in a physical manner as opposed to a digital one? That's what I ask. And I kind of have to dig into the basis for some of the aesthetic movements that influence this adoption of CG, since it's just, it isn't just a money factor. And I don't know, from what I've gleaned, it seems like CGI doesn't cost, it costs more than practical effects. And in camera, opticals, at least, nobody's using optical printers anymore. But there's a quote from Ray Harryhausen that I wanted to read because it's from his book An Animated Life, which is an amazing book that you should try and locate a copy of, maybe at a library loan, because I don't think it's in print anymore. But he said, "Perhaps my fate would have been significantly different if it had been CGI that had brought Kong to life. I might not have been so inspired and could have ended up as a plumber. Three-dimensional stop-motion model animation created a fantasy world that was so rare. The way the creatures moved encouraged a sense that one was watching a miracle. But when the miraculous becomes commonplace, the concept of the miracles ceases to be miraculous." So, thinking, and here's the thing, the thinking that an advancement in technology means better art has been spoon-fed to audiences basically, often, all the time, since the beginning though. And usually that's as an added attraction that promises unseen wonders. And, when CGI became ubiquitous, it was like suddenly craft and skill and years of perfecting physical and photochemical techniques could just be like gladly thrown away. And often a lot of directors and effects men would talk about how hard it was to make movies before computers, and often you'd find those same people falling into an over-reliance on the newest tech. George Lucas is kind of the poster child for that. I'm not a blind hater of George Lucas, but the criticisms, they hold water. And then there's other effects men like Douglas Trumbull and, Phil Tippett, who just, as a matter of job security, just with how much studios were pushing into CGI. But when I hear Douglas Trumbull talk about, why he wants to make films super realistic and on like this high frame rate and all this stuff, he was going really into like aesthetic ideology kind of territory. And that's the kind of thing where it wasn't just, following this trend or this cool like possibilities of it. It's more like, some idea that art needs to be the one-to-one analog of reality, and just totally missing the mark when it comes to artifice. But yeah, so it's interesting. It's as if, anything, any method you would do before CGI was just like redundant and unnecessary, and some of it would become, like, some of it truly is. But art making, in that sense, it's just treated like any other piece of machinery nowadays. Though things don't seem built to last. It's built to be today's interest and tomorrow's garbage. But the results do speak for themselves. And traditional methods, and when I say that I mean physical ones, whether they're drawing, painting, sculpture, they've gone on for millennia. And even film, came into its own with different variants like animation. And then before suddenly digital came around, and they canned basically the continuation of that medium, hand-drawn animation. And traditional filmmaking was sort of denied a future in a way. Not that it's a strictly traditional future. It was just pushed to the wayside. Essentially, it's just for hobbyists and artists, who really want to go old school. That's kind of the image now. If you're like saying, you don't want to do anything digital, but my big question is, why? The point seems to have been ease and expedience, but not a love for sort of ingenuity and the kind of ingenuity that came before. And I have said it before, but it demands repeating. Expediency breeds mediocrity. And it's been about moving away from the physical into the digital, the immaterial. Kind of like what I was saying earlier. People seem to have an idea that something is missing without the use of physical and practical effects. It's almost the same way people notice that something in morality is missing without an appeal to a higher power. But it is true. There is sort of this push for an emphasis on practical effects in marketing and certain films. Like, oh, we use practical effects for this or that. I don't know, like Christopher Nolan. It's kind of a marketing gimmick for a lot of his films, even though it's not strictly true that he just uses practical. But it's become fetishized now, practical effects. And I think that, it can go a little too far. Any effect can go too far. I think more recently now, I found that John Carpenter's The Thing, it's just a little much. A lot of the effects, I think, are allowed to play out too long. And that's, a criticism of a film that uses just practical effects. To be fair. But I want to reiterate, though, that so if you have a scale, there's subordinate imagination and then stimulated imagination. And, like, on the far end, you have, CGI that's just stimulating your imagination. It's presenting you with everything, every aspect. There's no gaps in it. And on the other end, there's stimulated imagination, and that could be hearing somebody tell a story, and then somewhere in between there's, traditional cinema, somewhere in there. And a movie like Forbidden Planet is a masterclass in the sort of stimulated imagination, like, area of that. You've got the Krell doors, or the doors that suggest the body shape of the Krell. Or the whole staging of the attack of the Id monster. It's marvelous. It's a great compromise between showing and not showing the monster. That's why invisible monsters are one of my favorite kind of monsters. But compare also, I thought the Medusa sequences in both versions of Clash of the Titans. You know, I'm not going to comment on like the inane music and the remake and all that. Um, it mainly comes down to the lackluster design of Medusa herself in some ways, and the staging. It's like, what do you find more frightening? Ray Harryhausen's Hag from Hell, or that like a prettied up version who looks like she takes selfies, if given a phone. I mean, she jumps around more, but the scene, it kind of loses its tension because there's we've seen so much of her, and she's even designed to be attractive. Maybe they were trying to I think they were trying to gain sympathy for her, but anyway, that's the point of that is Harryhausen's version is much, much slower. It's darker, lighting wise. Literally, I'm not talking about it's darker because it's violent, and it's torchlit. That's all the lighting we get. It's red torchlight. It's menacing. The room has mysterious paintings. It's littered with the human statues of the previous victims. There's this quiet dread before we even hear Medusa, and it's just this snake's rattle. Because we first see that, and then she makes herself known by killing one of Perseus's men, but it's with an arrow, so we don't actually see her, more or less. And then she's mostly in shadow the whole time, and Perseus has to make calculated moves, not slide around like he's Mario. The glimpses, that we do get of her are chilling in their suggestion for the reason that we're not given all of her at once. And the stop motion animation didn't allow for the free-flowing camera moves of the 2010 remake, I think, yeah. So a more careful type of planning was required. Not that shooting a complex VFX sequence, and, the 2010 version is complex, not that it doesn't need as much or even more coordination. It's just that the limitations of the 1981 version created a scene that works as a truly suspenseful sequence, rather than a convoluted boss fight, as per the remake. But sometimes a discourse on CGI versus practical effects can become tiresome or cringe, or kind of miss the mark entirely. It's especially when it's more about nostalgia than understanding the pros and cons. Like I was saying, I don't care if you're marketing your movie because it's using practical effects because The Thing did. That's not as exciting, especially because those films were staged differently, or even before the films I really love that use practical effects. And I mean, honestly, more and more my favorite movies are kind of towards the golden age of Hollywood, or at least before Star Wars in some manner. And those, the designs of things are different. But anyway, it's, there's CGI is unrestrained. It's, too much malleability. It's chaos. And loosening of limitations is not an inherently good thing. Removing most of the human part of art because technology allows us to, and this is deemed okay, when maybe there's another point to why people make art in the first place, and it's not just because they have to. It's just it's because they want to. And I think I think you really love a medium, you'll work in that medium, but financial reasons dictate otherwise, and that's why film is all about that, really. Most of the praise of CGI that I've seen is simply that it helps things become more real. Motion tracking allows for handheld cameras to be used, so once again, it's just more and more veristic documentary style stuff, and and there's a lot of other things that I could touch on, like the VFX companies are basically they can get moved all over the place, and get micromanaged by different studios, and it's not like having an effects house where you had people in a building making models and shooting stuff, and it made things difficult. kind of, but yeah, I just wanted to bring this up so that you might think about why these kinds of decisions are made and why certain methods are pushed as opposed to others, and also just how this stuff makes you feel. So that's my new experiment in this format, and I'll probably be doing some others because there's definitely topics that I've had tumbling around in my head and seem to be more or less polished. So thanks for watching. Have a good night.